As we've invested $200+ million a year now in generative AI, we're going to see, I think, some really significant breakthroughs over the next few years, which will be great for humanity. I also think we'll see some really scary examples too.
How important is the cybersecurity aspect to all of this?
Critical, absolutely critical. We welcome more and more startups coming into the space, but we do notice that a number of them are pretty cavalier when it comes to this.
They pointed a finger and said radical leftist. What is your response to that?
We focus on the facts. So we're going to see even bigger winners, and I think the consequences for the losers will be even quicker to materialize. I think companies that are not figuring out how this next new wave of generative AI technologies will affect their customers, their businesses, are at peril.
We are in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and we're going to be talking to the CEO of Thomson Reuters, Steve Hasker. Thomson Reuters is a global content and technology company, and they did $7.3 billion in revenue in 2024. They have over 26,000 employees globally. We're going to be talking to Steve about AI, all the sectors of their business, and the media landscape that they face today. I'm William Salvi, and this is the CEO Series, where we have real conversations with real CEOs. I hope you subscribe to our channel. We have more stories coming out with more CEOs and more businesses, and let's go talk to Steve. We are with the CEO of Thomson Reuters, Steve Hasker. Steve, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Will, good to be here. Thanks.
So when we were first presented with this opportunity, I saw Thomson Reuters, and all I thought was the media arm, because that's kind of what I see all the time. So if you could you talk about the entirety of the business and just tell us a little bit more about it? Because I think most people would probably think of Reuters versus...
Yeah, I mean, Reuters is the part of the brand that people recognize because it's the largest and oldest news agency in the world. So the Reuters part of the business is the largest wholesaler of news across the world. 2,700 journalists who really are the source of a lot of the news that we consume, not only through Reuters.com, but through all sorts of media outlets that each of us use every day. The rest of the business, which is really 90+% of our revenues, serves professionals in what we call the big three segments. So we serve legal professionals, both law firms, in-house, court systems, judges, attorneys general, etc. We serve tax and accounting professionals and auditors, and then we serve corporations, including the heads of tax, the general counsel. And that, as I said, is 90+% of our business.
How does that affect your business relationships? Because you do have the media arm, and it reports on all things.
You know, a number of friends and former colleagues who are CEOs have had stories written about their businesses, and even then, that they haven't liked. They have acknowledged the fact that the Reuters team has written a story that was fact-based and was free of bias. And so while they may not have liked, the particular story itself, they've always respected that.
They can't get mad at you just being like, look, we're trying to be our best at just...
Well, they can.
Yeah. And they do. Can you talk more about generative AI and AI changing the tax and legal landscape?
When you think about generative AI, it really has the ability to transform the production of the first version of a document. So whether that's the first version of a research memo, the first version of a contract, or a briefing or an opinion, all of these things can be produced by automated tools within a Gen AI environment. And that, we think, is going to change the business model of the law firms. It's going to change the apprenticeship model, the kinds of talent that law firms bring in, the amount that they spend on technology. And it'll start to, I think, change attorney-client privilege and how lawyers think about data privacy and data protections. So all of those things, I think, over the next few years will start to transform as a result of Gen AI. And you can apply versions of that thinking to the tax and accounting and the audit professions as well. These are professions that are, to varying degrees, ripe for increasing automation, enabling the professionals to do less of the grunt work and more of the sort of value added, the highly specialized thinking and applying judgment. And I think that's what we're going to see over the next 3 to 5 years.
Do you have any fears about job displacement?
The belief here at Thomson Reuters is that we will not be replaced by AI, but we may well be replaced by people who are using AI. So in other words, I think it's sort of incumbent upon all of us
to understand these technologies, start getting comfortable and using them for our benefit and for the benefit of the institutions we work. I think if we don't cross that bridge, then we're at risk. But to predict wide-scale job losses or job replacement, I think requires a set of assumptions around level of economic activity and what new jobs and entirely new professions are going to be created by AI. And it's too early to do that.
Since we're talking about such sensitive information, how important is the cybersecurity aspect to all of this?
Critical, absolutely critical. I mean, if you think about, the idea of a law firm's document management system and all of the IP that's contained within that, but more importantly, the client-sensitive information, the client proprietary information, if that were to leak into a model and leak from a model to a competitive firm, or heaven forbid a client's competitor, then that's a big step backwards for sort of generative AI and its application to the legal profession. So the way we think about this is to say that is sacrosanct. As a client or customer of TR, your IP cannot and will not be output of a generative AI product of ours. And we welcome more and more startups coming into the space, but we do notice that a number of them are pretty cavalier when it comes to this.
Did you always know you wanted to be CEO of a large company like this?
I'm not someone who's ever had a career plan. I envy people who say, okay, I want to go from here to here to here, and I have a well-trodden path. I never had that in mind. I came from a family where my mother was a social worker and had a psychology degree, and my father was an engineer turned CEO. So I had a sense of what it might be like to run a business. And I was sort of always attracted to that, but I never set out on that path necessarily. What I've been able to do, though, is to focus on opportunities that afforded me the chance to learn. In the course of my career, I've always used that question, will I learn more if I say yes to this opportunity versus stay where I am? And I've always followed that, and it's served me pretty well.
Both your father and your mother had a big impact on you and who you became.
The two attributes that both of my parents had or have is they're both hardworking. There was never a sense of entitlement, or certainly not one that I detected. Everything that any of us achieved, we had to earn. And I think the second is a degree of modesty. And that my mother particularly has that in terms of, there are things you can learn from everybody. And if you shut up and listen to them, they'll teach you something.
Do you have any siblings too?
Yeah, I have an older sister.
Okay.
She's the CEO of an institution in Australia called Vic Sport, which is the peak body for community sports. And I have a younger brother who's a cattle farmer.
Hatred and violence from the left.
What are your general thoughts on the media landscape as the CEO? I know there's a separation of church and state there with the company, but tell me a little bit.
I'm in that category of people who sort of, hopefully in a healthy way, paranoid about all of our end markets. So not just the news and media end market, but the legal, the tax and accounting, the audit, the risk, fraud and compliance. Within news, I think we've seen huge disruption, as a result of first digital distribution and then social media, and a sort of a ubiquity of access to news, and also the rise of citizen journalism. It's worth remembering that Reuters, since the early 1940s, and now all of Thomson Reuters, is guided by what we call the trust principles. And in essence, what those principles dictate that we do is that we stay independent. We focus on a independent sort of third-party fact-based freedom of bias, free from bias. And I think in this environment, there's never been a more important time for a news service to stick to those principles. We will make sure that our facts are triple checked. If we will make sure that there are at least 3 people prepared to go on the record and substantiate that which we are asserting. I think that provides us not only with an essential role to play in this environment, but also a competitive advantage. It's not the most entertaining news source or service that you're going to be able to access, but that's its secret.
That's not the point either.
That's not the point, exactly.
Yeah. Do you think that there are too many CEOs out there? And I mean that specifically like CEOs at large companies, and I'm not asking to talk about one in particular, But we hear a lot about certain CEOs right now, and they're very media forward. And sometimes I think they're overexposed. And so I guess my question is do you think there's a little too much of that in the world right now where people aren't having as much humility and not enough listening?
Look, I think, Will, it's a balance. You know, there's certainly, I think there's a role for business to play in having a voice on all manner of issues. And certainly, you know, some CEOs are comfortable wading into that space. The way I've interpreted my role is, you know, it is first and foremost leading Thomson Reuters, you know, for the benefit of our customers, our colleagues, and our shareholders, and doing that as best I can, and that consumes all of my time.
When we were first presented with the opportunity, I know about Reuters, the news division that they have. I did not know about how dynamic this company was, nor did I know how large or the history of the company. I found it very interesting that the news division accounted for 10% of their business, and then 90% was for everything else. But we all know about Reuters. And on top of that, Steve had mentioned that as the CEO of a global company, he's had dialogue with other CEOs that the news division covers. That's a very interesting dynamic that Steve has to deal with and that the leadership team has to deal with, because at the end of the day, they are providing products and services to a lot of clients of theirs and customers of theirs, but they also have a news division that's very in the middle and reports the truth and facts as they see them. So that's just an interesting dynamic that the CEO has to deal with. So I loved hearing his perspective on that. Two of the most powerful men tweeted about you, and they said radical leftist. One, what is your response to that? And then two, as the CEO, how do you manage outside noise like that? Because you don't want two people with that much influence to say things like that. So I'm just interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we're governed by the trust principles. We adhere to the trust principles. We are neither left nor right. And so if you consume our news, any one of our stories, I think you see that. You know, it comes through in the way we report the facts and we focus on the facts.
My dad's a lawyer. He's got a good law firm in Chicago. My brothers are lawyers. I think they would be apprehensive to implementing AI into their business. What would you tell them?
You know, it is the future. And so I think it's a question of starting to play around with the tools and get comfortable with those tools and figuring out how you can use those tools for your own personal and professional benefit.
Do you think that the companies that do not adopt artificial intelligence sooner than later will start to just generally
Well, I think that
go down?
One of the things that we're looking at, not only in the sort of digital environment, which is now 25 years old, but as accelerated in a generative AI environment, is that the stakes for those winners will be even higher. So we're going to see even bigger winners. And I think the consequences for the losers will be even quicker to materialize. So, you know, I think companies that are not figuring out how this next new wave of generative AI technologies will affect their customers, their businesses, are at peril.
What are some of your potential pitfalls of AI?
I think the biggest sort of potential pitfall is, or at least the first one that I think about, is relying on models that are not trained on accurate content that's free from bias. And so that's the biggest pitfall, that we all start relying on models that have been inaccurately or inappropriately trained. So that's one. I think the second one is, is the idea that AI can be used for good and for enabling professionals to be more effective, enabling for medical breakthroughs and huge increases in efficiency of government departments, of corporations, of institutions all over the world. I think there's also an AI for bad, and whether that's deep fakes, whether that's used by cyber fraudsters, that's where AI can go wrong. And so, there's a sort of a content and a training aspect, and I think there's also the intent of those using AI. And like anything, that second part, we're going to see, I think, some really significant breakthroughs over the next few years, which will be great for humanity, not only for professionals that we serve, but for humanity and society more broadly. I also think we'll see some really scary examples too, and those are going to have to be managed.
Be honest. I know AIs are making it more efficient. It's incredible the capabilities we use it day to day in our business. Is it making us dumber as humans?
It's a great question, because I think if you look back on some of the productivity tools that we've used, I mean, the classic example, I trained as an accountant coming out of undergrad, is Excel. And I think you make an argument, I certainly fell into this trap, that instead of just thinking at a fairly fundamental level about revenue and cost and margin and so forth and sense checking it, in it went to Excel and out spat an answer, and it's Excel, it must be okay.
It's right.
And so I think it's too early to say AI is making us dumber. Certainly, but there is a risk with these tools that we become over reliant on the output and that we don't apply the judgment and the checking. And has Google made us dumber? I don't think so, right? Relative to going to encyclopedia, I think it's afforded us and given us access to much more information that's actually made us smarter. But there's always that risk.
How is it managing 26,000 employees? I assume they're in every continent.
Yeah, we're in 70 countries. We have news bureaus. We have over 200 news bureaus. Again, this is a question of having the right team. I think if any chief executive or senior executive says that, uses the word I in terms of managing that many people, I think they're probably a bit delusional. It's a question of having the right team and I think the right sort of culture and values to support it. And, the best that a chief executive or any executive can do, I think, is to model the right behaviours.
I mentioned my dad and my brothers have a law firm in Chicago, and I said they're probably a little more apprehensive to implement AI into their business. What does that mean? What does it do to jobs? What does it do to their people? And Steve said it's the future. And I'm interested at different various forms of law, different forms of accounting firms, different sizes of accounting firms, how apprehensive certain firms would be to implementing AI into their company. I also assume that those two industries are slower than, say, a tech company or a newer age company. It's just, I assume that's a conversation that they have very frequently when they're pitching their products and services or where they're implementing a new product or service with one of their clients. But I would assume that that's a conversation that the Thomson Reuters teams have that are probably difficult to implement those products and services into the firms. Your first month or week was literally like the start of COVID.
The board sort of appointed me my first day. I'm not quite sure why this was the case. I think it was March 15th, 2020, which was a Sunday. Sunday morning, 9 o'clock. My first call is with the senior team that I'd inherited. And the question on the table for that call was, should we ask, at the time, I think it was 26,000 people, to work from home?
Yeah.
I was the least qualified to have a point of view on that question, certainly of the people on that call. So I was sort of reminded of my hometown of Melbourne, and one of the great sporting coaches in my hometown is a guy called Craig Bellamy, and I heard him say a number of years ago, the bigger the game, the simpler the game plan. And COVID was by no means a game, but I just remember thinking, okay, if I apply something like that to the decision that we're all facing, what's the thing that's most important? And the thing that was most important in a business that's driven by intellectual property is the health and safety of our people and their ability to serve our customers. And so ultimately that dictated the decision to ask people to work from home. And we were one of the companies that thrived in that environment, which none of us could have predicted. I mean, we look back on it, we've all adapted to working from home. We've all adapted to video conferencing and a much greater use of digital tools to get our daily work done. But at the time, it wasn't quite as clear.
Tell me what's next for Thomson Reuters and how you continue to grow the business.
So we are very focused on using generative AI to innovate for the benefit of our customers. What we're looking for is to put new products, to put features and functionality in the hands of our customers using Gen AI that drive fundamental improvements in their business and in their daily lives. That's the exhaustive focus, and it's a fun one. It's not an easy one. You know, in my first couple of years, we undertook what we called imaginatively the change program, which was really our Get Fit program to enable us to take advantage of technologies. And it so happened that as we were coming out of our change program, along came generative AI. ChatGPT-4 passed the bar exam. I did not know that. Right, and then we're off to the races.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, but we got ourselves, I think, in pretty good shape to be able to pivot to being an innovator. So we have an objective to be the most innovative company in business information services and the highest performing team in business information services. And those are lofty goals, but we will not stop until we get there.
I'm going to go on to the fire round now.
Okay, not really, but yeah.
All right, let's do it. How do you de-stress?
I'm very focused on sleep. I know it's not a very interesting answer, but I try to get at least 8 hours a night.
What are 2 outside hobbies that you have?
I play tennis, and I follow a number of Australian football teams.
TV show you're binging or last binge?
I actually watched, believe it or not, a Slovenian murder mystery show on one of the services. I can't remember which service.
Yeah.
It was great.
What's a book that aspiring leaders or executives should read?
The Power Broker.
Okay.
Robert Caro.
Tell me about your best friend and why are they your best friend?
One of them is an executive and semi-professional fisherman in South Africa.
Who's your biggest role model?
The approach I've always taken is to try to pick and choose bits and pieces of different people.
Steve, you're awesome. I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me. Sounds like you got exciting things going on in the future, so I'm excited to see what happens.
We do indeed.
One thing that I think is necessary in the world is providing information to people that is trying its best to be true, factual, non-biased. And I've viewed Reuters that way, their news division. It seems that he has a deep respect for that, which I appreciated. You can see a CEO at a large company having less of a respect for that, and I didn't get that sense from Steve at all. I loved hearing about Steve's parents. His dad was a CEO, his sister's a CEO. I mean, there's a through line here. So it's obvious that Steve has had some executive experiences pretty early on in his life, and it's translated well. And Thomson Reuters has been performing pretty well since he's been the CEO, so. Generative AI, I'm gonna restart.
Yeah, do what you like.
Restart, that was very poor. It was a very nice answer, but I did say fire round, not long-winded round. Thank God for editing. You binged it last night? You binged all the episodes?
You guys are onto something.
Great interview. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. It's very important. More CEOs to come. Smash that like button. Let's go.